There's a lot to unpack on today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. Since I last spoke to you, Alexander Isak's gone AWOL in Spain, Liverpool have made a bid, Newcastle have made a bid for Benjamin Sesko, and also there's possibility of another transfer target emerging. We'll talk about all that and more in today's episode, so let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Welcome to a new location. It'll take me a little bit of time to get everything set up properly, but obviously because so much has happened over the last few days and I haven't spoken to you since Thursday, I had to get on here and break down a hell of a lot of stuff that's happened over the last few days. And we'll begin with, as usual, as it seems at the moment, Alexander Isak. Now, Liverpool have bid for him, 110 million plus add-ons, apparently rejected out of hand, and then Liverpool, as in this sort of performative thing that they're trying to do, it appears, said that they're not going to come back in. I think everybody knows that Liverpool will be back in for Isak at some stage. He's been in Spain, AWOL, apparently, according to Eddie Howe, he didn't know that he was going to Spain to train at the Real Sociedad training complex. Now, I tweeted about this and it's sort of split opinion, and I stand by what I said at the time. Basically, I didn't have a problem with Isak training in Spain if it was better for him, more comfortable for him. Newcastle know that he has these people out there that have helped him get better from injuries and everything, so if he's just going out to get his head straight and come back and train, he's now back in the UK. We'll see if he'll train this week. I didn't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is the AWOL thing, not telling Eddie Howe. I think the big thing that I've sort of held on to a little bit over the last few days, and weeks, even in this mess, is that Alexander Isak respected Eddie Howe and Alexander Isak respected his teammates, and it was all the problems with, yes, he wanted to leave, and all the problems he had were with other people, you know, Darren Eales maybe, or Paul Mitchell before he left, and his agent was the one stirring it. But it is not good enough to not tell Eddie Howe, who's been the man who's helped you through everything, helped develop you into the player you are today. The reason why Liverpool want to buy you now is a large degree of that is down to Eddie Howe. Obviously, he's done a lot of work himself too, but Eddie Howe is a huge reason why Alexander Isak is the player he is today, and he's gone to bat for him even in the last few days and weeks. So I think that it's really poor form that he didn't ask the permission of Eddie Howe or even tell him that he was planning to do that, because I don't think, as I said last week, I don't think Eddie Howe will really care. I don't think he'll mind where he is. If he's not in Asia, what difference does it make if he's in Spain, apart from, again, the optics of the whole situation and the injury thing, that's why he couldn't go to the pre-season tour in the first place. I understand all that, but really, I mean, if he's just going to be in a more comfortable place training in Spain, I didn't really mind that. What I do mind, though, as I say, is the AWOL thing. Off the back of this, it really just does create the difficulty in seeing a way back. If it, at this stage, that's really not acceptable, because there isn't a bid that's been accepted. There is no real progress in terms of Isak going to Liverpool, despite what all the noise says. So there's a very real possibility that he is still a Newcastle player next season, and he'll have to rebuild those bridges. Now, if he carried on respecting Eddie Howe and respecting the players, then that would be easier and more possible. And I thought that's what he was doing. But if he hasn't told Eddie Howe this, then that's a bit of a slap in the face. We'll see if he trains this week. He's obviously back in the UK. That emerged over the weekend, and hopefully he will train. But Eddie Howe was very strong with his comments. He has to earn the right to do that. So there's a different tactic here. I wonder what's happened behind the scenes. We'll see how it plays out. But Liverpool had the bid rejected. They've said that they won't come back. But I think they also said that around Virgil van Dijk, and then did. So this is a long-term play for Liverpool. They know what they're doing, and they're trying to get the fee lower and put Newcastle into a corner. But Newcastle are not really in a corner when it comes to Isak, because they've said they'll only sell if a player comes in of a similar sort of ilk, of a top number 9 comes in, and the man that they want is Benjamin Sesko. They've made a bid for that player on the sort of roughly the same terms that RB Leipzig have wanted, 65 million plus add-ons, which we spoke about, but it hasn't been accepted. It also hasn't been rejected, and this is kind of what I've been saying about the way that these deals get done and these conversations happen. They're very fluid. They're not accepting and rejecting and official bids, and that's all. A lot of that is just noise and trying to put it in ways that people understand and trying to make it easier to digest. Really, these conversations are quite fluid and quite complex at times. I think this is the case here. By the sounds of it, it's a sell-on that's the issue, or maybe RB Leipzig are just not accepting it fully because they want to see what Manchester United do, and they would love a bidding war because they need to rebuild their squad even though they got an agreed fee. But Sesko still hasn't made his choice. There was emergence of this suggestion that he may have chosen Newcastle from Slovenia, but that hasn't really progressed any further. I think that he would, I think it's pretty obvious to me that he would prefer to go to Manchester United if they could do the deal. If he wanted to join Newcastle, he's had the chance to say that over the last 2 weeks, as I've said, but also there's a sense that Manchester United can't necessarily do that deal, so maybe he's waiting to see if that happens, and if it doesn't, then he'll join Newcastle. And I know that upsets a lot of people that he would prefer to join Manchester United. Does that rule him out of Newcastle? According to Eddie Howe, who says he wants players who are desperate to join Newcastle, maybe it does, but I think the reality of the situation is every signing that Newcastle have made, they've not really gone in for against a top club and won the battle. Even Tonali and Isak and all those players, Bruno, there were other big clubs that looked at them but hadn't made their moves, and that's the crucial thing, that Newcastle didn't beat those clubs to those signatures. They moved on and Newcastle took the opportunity. Those players may well have chosen bigger clubs and other clubs if they had other offers. If Sesko chooses Newcastle, the likelihood is it's because Manchester United can't do the deal or aren't at the table when he wants them to be. We'll see what happens in the next couple of days. Newcastle have apparently asked for a 24-hour answer. We'll see on that as well. But yeah, for me, Sesko, I've had doubts and scepticism right from the very start with this one, because it feels like if he really wanted to join, he would have made that clear earlier. In a lot of people's interests that he makes his decision quickly, not just Manchester United, not just Newcastle, Liverpool as well. There's lots of dominoes waiting to fall, as is the case with these things, and Newcastle need a striker of that level. It isn't just about getting a striker, and this is what I said last week, it's Sesko or Isak to me. I'm a little bit less confident on the whole thing with Isak and settling back in and everything because of this Spain thing and not telling Eddie Howe, and we'll see what happens with his training and how happy he is. It does put Newcastle into a difficult position if they can't get Sesko, but it does mean that they're also giving up on a striker, and they're also giving up on the situation as well. There are other players linked. There's a little bit more confidence on Johan Visser now, because I think Brentford have softened their stance after a chat with him when he went into training, had a chat with Keith Andrews, and then didn't train with the team last week. So it's almost a mirror image of what's happening with Isak and what's happening with Visser. And I wrote a piece on this, and other people have said, can Newcastle fans and Liverpool fans and whoever be hypocritical about having a go at Isak for what he's doing and then celebrating Visser or Trent Alexander-Arnold, all these things? Ultimately, when a player downs tools, when a player does all this, if it benefits your club, you don't mind. I think that is generally the view. So it just happens. It's one of those things. But as I say with Isak, that doesn't mean that I think it's disrespectful to Eddie Howe specifically because of the work he's done with Isak to help him get better. And I felt that Isak was respectful to his teammates and Eddie Howe within this thing, and that maybe creates this different idea that perhaps isn't the case. We'll see on that, but let me know in the comment section what you think on the Isak situation. Is there a way back in for him if he stays at Newcastle? It still feels to me fairly likely until Sesko makes this call on his future, and I think if Sesko was really, really keen on Newcastle, if he wasn't waiting for Manchester United, he would have made that call now, because he's had 2 weeks pretty much to do it and hasn't chosen to do it. So that's where I'm at with the whole Sesko and Isak thing. It's still very much the big conversation and the big topic, because it really, everything else rests on it. They're not looking at centre backs at the moment. That's on hold. The centre midfield situation, I've written a piece for Forbes on this last week as well. That's really worrying to me, because I spoke on the video about Joe Willock and him needing an upgrade. He then got injured in the game against the K-League team, and he's going to be out for possibly 6 weeks. So there's only 4 midfielders really for 3 positions, with Miley, Tonali, Joelinton and Bruno. They need 6 for those positions, but they need 6 quality additions. It really shows the stagnation of the project in some ways, that Newcastle, 4 years into this project, you would think that Newcastle would be in a position where poor form would have consequences, but it doesn't appear to, because Joe Willock has not been right for a year, and there's no talk of improving on him. And if there is a centre midfielder who comes in, it'll be to replace Longstaff. Really, in my opinion, in an ideal world, they'll need two centre midfielders, not just one. But at the moment, it feels like possibly two strikers, a centre back, and a midfielder is as far as it'll go. Most likely, two strikers and a centre back. I would say at this stage, I'm not confident that they'll upgrade in midfield. Let me know in the comments what you think. But there are a lot of problems with that as well, and it's so difficult, the whole thing, because the Isak situation has completely taken over the summer. And I've said on the True Faith podcast yesterday, if he'd said to us all in May that Isak will go, we'd automatically say that was a disaster. Suddenly we're sort of recalibrating and say there's still positives that can come out of this from the position that we're all in now, which is that that it's August. Newcastle play the team that he could go to in this month. And also it means that selling him would mean needing to sign a replacement of the right level 2 weeks before the season. This is all a complete nightmare, and this is why I said if Sesko doesn't join, and it still doesn't feel like that for me, then Newcastle United need to react by not selling Alexander Isak and reintegrating him, and we'll see how that plays out. But there was a little bit more of a prickly response from Eddie Howe over the last couple of days to the Isak situation, where previously he'd been quite supportive and defensive of him. It felt like there was a little bit of a different direction of travel with that whole thing. So we'll see how it plays out. We'll see if he trains this week, what happens. That may well be known to you today. I don't know if they're back in, because obviously they're travelling back from South Korea, so I'd imagine that they're probably training either Tuesday or Wednesday. So we'll see how that progresses, as I mentioned, and we'll talk about that later in the week. And the final thing to discuss is Kerry Hope saying that Gonçalo Ramos, the Portuguese striker from Paris Saint-Germain, is a potential other option now on the list to as an alternative to Benjamin Sesko, alongside Johan Visser. Well, as a striker that Newcastle may want alongside Johan Visser, alongside Rodrigo Muniz, who's been mentioned, and Ollie Watkins too. There are plenty of strikers I'm sure Newcastle are looking at. This isn't really progress or any real news, but it's something else to discuss. And Gonçalo Ramos, I think, would be a sensible move. I know some fans have been critical of the situation because he's not really of the level. Is he a good replacement for Isak? But this is what I was saying. Once you fail to get Sesko, he was the last of the sort of big ticket items on the striker market this summer. If you think about Ekitike, Gyökeres, and now him going, they were the three players that everyone thought would move this summer. This is the last opportunity for Newcastle to get someone on that sort of world-class ceiling level. Without that, you're looking at maybe the next opportunity is to reinvigorate someone who previously had that and maybe hasn't fulfilled it. And Gonçalo Ramos was someone Newcastle looked at a couple of years ago when they were looking at Isak. They really seriously considered going for Ramos. He went to PSG a couple of years ago. He scored double figures in each of the last two seasons in Ligue 1, and basically, rarely ever being a regular starter. One goal in every 2 games. He's a bit more of a fox in the box. He is over 6 foot, but he's not a physical specimen. He's not going to lead the line in the way that Sesko would maybe, which is a little bit of a concern. But his underlying stats are really, really good. If you look at the non-penalty goals, 95th percentile, non-penalty expected goals, 99th percentile, 98th percentile for shots total, shots creating action, 77th percentile, non-penalty expected goals and expected assists, 99th percentile as well, 91st percentile for pass completion, 98th percentile for touches as well. So lots of really sort of heavily involved in build-up play, maybe a little bit, but mostly I think, as you can see by the number of green lines in that top part of in the attacking part of that scout report, really he's a fox in the box. He's going to score goals, and that's not the worst thing in the world. I think this is a sensible move at the right price, and you've got an alternative. Do you go for a lesser striker, someone whose ceiling is maybe a little bit smaller, someone like Ollie Watkins, who's reached his level, who's guaranteed goals in the Premier League but is not a world-class player, or a top-class player at least? Gonçalo Ramos is 24 and has been earmarked as being a really good striker at European level previously, and he's just fallen off a little bit. Do you look at reinvigorating that rather than going for someone like Watkins, who is a little bit older? You're going to get 2 or 3 good years out of him, but he's not going to get any better. There's an opportunity to really, as I say, take Gonçalo Ramos back to the point where PSG thought it was worth buying him, and he was one of the sort of brightest prospects in Europe. That's what Newcastle would look to do, I think, if they signed him. It's very far off at the moment, that in terms of whether they really want him. He's just on the list. I think really the only player they've moved for is Sesko. I think that says all that you need to know about what Newcastle's priority is, and I think Sesko's decision will then take them back to the drawing board and they'll look at this situation. I think there was a report that they've been quoted £60 million for Ollie Watkins. I don't even think that would be enough for Villa to really sell him because of the situation. I know they're in talks with Samu as well, but it would be the same situation as Newcastle selling Isak. They would need another striker. It would just cause them a lot of difficulty to part with Ollie Watkins. So they're not going to make it easy. I think Ramos is unwanted at PSG. He's not involved. Obviously, they've been linked with Randall Kolo Muani as well, Newcastle, this summer. I've given them my thoughts on that. I think Ramos would make a lot more sense because they've watched him previously. And stylistically, it maybe wouldn't make as much sense as Sesko, because I think Newcastle want a striker who can be a physical presence and get on the end of a lot of crosses. That's not really Ramos's game. So it'll be interesting to see if Newcastle do move for him, but I think this is the next thing that you do. You go and reinvigorate careers in terms of targets. You go and look at players who maybe have fallen off at big clubs, not given the opportunity, and try and reinvigorate them rather than trying to give a lesser striker a chance at a higher level. That's what I do anyway. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Do you think Newcastle should move for Gonçalo Ramos? Are there any other strikers? Nick Walter-Marder is somebody who Newcastle have also been linked with as well. I might discuss him later in the week if Newcastle do turn to him. Let me know in the comment section what you think. As I say, like, share and subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Cheers.